The Media Project. SM Graves Associates is partnered with Rove Creations to offer design-build services in residential and mixed-use development. We believe in building neighborhoods from the bottom up. We're dedicated to solving the middle-market housing challenge in both rural and urban environments. If you'd like to engage an innovative and detail-oriented design-build firm, we'd like to hear from you. Find out more at smgravesassociates.com/community development.
Hey there, fearless listeners, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Are We Here Yet podcast's latest feature. That's right. New for 2024, we're taking you into technology development in rural America through the lens of our great communities here in Vermont, the great state of Vermont, USA. And I have to say, I'm not alone in this endeavor. With us to bring you compelling stories with a multiplicity of great perspectives are two of my good friends. The first, Will Jeffries of Blumenthal Enterprises, and Ryan Munn, a Vermont technology advisor. Gents, thanks for contributing. Thanks for being here. I'm so pleased that we're doing this together for the first time.
Well, thanks for having us. This is very exciting, and it's a really important topic. So it's like to do this with both of you.
Thanks, Scott. I'm excited to be here for the ride.
Cool. We were all going to slide in and be in the same region, as it were, but we couldn't slide because there's no snow in a big chunk of Vermont right now for January 2024. But hey, you know, we're doing what we can. We have a number of different great concepts to bring to you, and we're going to, I guess, get started right away. I'm going to let you, Ryan, sort of introduce our first topic because this was one of yours. So without further ado.
Take it away, Ryan.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think the concept is that, you know, sometimes we have ideas that get in our way, right? And so I wanted to talk about how we're coming together as friends and growing as colleagues to do business together and explore opportunity together. And a lot of people seem to think that we shouldn't mix business and personal relationships. And that concept, I don't know where exactly it may have come from, but I think that it persists and it inhibits us as a community, as an economic development, ecosystem. And I think that hopefully we can demonstrate as collaborators here a breaking of that myth, if you will. But I think there's also a lot of examples that we've talked about in the past. In fact, you've commented, directly on some of your experience in Massachusetts as well, looking at how you've come together with friends and collaborators to build business opportunities.
And so I'm going to guess for you, Ryan, the short version answer is yes, right? To mix sort of the business and pleasure when it comes to the relationships. So is that the case?
I believe so. I believe that the myth out there is that you shouldn't mix business and pleasure. And I think that, or you shouldn't mix business and personal relationships. And I think that's the myth. I think that's the thing that, can get in folks' way that are trying to reach for something new. And frankly, it's really when it comes to finding something that fulfills you, I think it's all about finding the opportunity to work with people you like working with and building relationships that cross those types of boundaries.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Ryan, especially the idea of intersectional spaces, but also that very often you'll have communities that grow up around an idea, whether that's directly a professional community around one industry or another, or even a local community in, say, a town or a regional area, a regional part of Vermont can grow up around a particular business or vocation.
Yeah.
And I think there is a myth out there that the idea of mixing personal relationships in business, the concern, I think the reasoning that I've heard for that is that people say, well, it gets messy because then you have these different dynamics and it's no longer as clear cut as a transactional interaction. But in my mind, that also loses some of the richness and rich possibility of being inspired by other people, of showing up together for an idea and for a project together.
Yeah. And this is something that I agree about this, because good relationship building, regardless of the type of relationship it is, there's good fundamentals there at work. And for those people who are, they're transparent, they're moral, they've got good business fundamental skills. I think that you can navigate uh, establishing good business relationships, and in some, we're all adults, and there's subtlety to the term a friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's different types of friends we have, there's with different trust levels and different levels of transparency, let's say. And so there's room for all of that. I'm wondering, though, if you can each give your mutual take. I think it would be valuable for listeners if we first identify, why would somebody not feel this way, so that, we can kind of, hopefully listeners sort of place themselves in some of what we're talking about. And then for those that would say, yeah, I disagree with you guys, maybe offer them some different perspective that helps them move out of that, to see that, the cultivation of valuable relationships is an important facet. And you miss a lot of that when you make what I would perceive as a rather artificial attempt, right, at siloing entirely, your personal relationships from your business relationships.
Well, it's funny. I would sort of support, Will's comments too, to say, democracy, discovery, and innovation are messy, right? And it's that messiness that is often beautiful. And so I'd say the argument for not mixing business and pleasure, I believe, dates way back to basically any example of centralizing social power or political power, right? The less communication you have amongst the population, the less power the population has to use their ideas over whoever has central power. And so I think the pervasiveness of that myth goes way back, to the beginning of that concept, where, oh, no, don't talk to each other, don't share information, trust the information that I'm giving you, trust the direction that I'm giving you, do the job I've told you to do, and then take the time off I've told you to take and go spend that time with your family and don't think about work, and then come back and work and silo those things. That's in the interest of those who are orchestrating it.
That's interesting. So it almost sounds like it comes from the same place deep in our collective past. Notions like, between friends and family, you never speak about politics and religion, right?
Right.
Whereas like people in control of things often do speak with their family and friends about politics and religion, right? That was kind of just a statement to isolate people from having those kind of conversations.
Yeah, I believe so.
Great point. Yes. It occurs to me, I think the three of us are fairly well aligned on this, that the idea of bringing personal and business connections together can be helpful. But just for the sake of making an interesting conversation, I think I'll actually play a little bit of foil to that, and maybe bring up some examples that we can bounce back and forth about where there's concerns in that. I mean, the first one that comes to mind, actually, as you were saying that, Ryan, was about concerns of even the person in power or in a position of decision making being concerned about how other people may perceive them if they have personal friendships or relationships with the people they're dealing business with. That some people may perceive that as something akin to nepotism or favoritism among a group. Mm-hmm. So that does bring up a very interesting dynamic, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember the first time I came to a management role when, social media was a thing, basically. That was one of the first conversations that my direct report said to me was, hey, be mindful of, who you're friending that works for you and that kind of thing on social media. It's a very, yeah, it's something. It was interesting because it was almost, well, what was interesting about it was it wasn't part of training, right? It was more of like a gut reaction that he was expressing. And my reaction was to kind of smile and nod and accept all the requests. It's up to me to be responsible with my interface with social media and with that public, right? And so, I think that there's a deeper thought to be had about that interaction for sure. But I think what we're all alluding to here too, and what you said, Scott, is that really it's that perhaps that statement does apply in a narrow subset. You just recognize like, hey, relationship between these two people doesn't work, but that's professional or personal. It almost doesn't matter now, right? But the reality is sometimes there just isn't good chemistry. But for the most part, it's a big schema of grays of how close are you with the people you're working with, and what I think is important about recognizing the error in this myth is that it takes up space in our collective mindset right now, and it's definitely observable as you listen to or hear people talk, especially people who are employees or directly hiring employees. You can hear that, and I think that's where we have an opportunity to remove or replace that mindset with a different way of looking at it. And I guess maybe that's what I'd pose to you guys too, is what are some other ways to phrase this? It's not just be friends with everybody, right? But what are some ways to think about business relationships, or another way to create a catchy way to think about it that opens us up to the positive opportunities?
I'll posit it in these two different perspectives. First being sort of the origin of my own personal, the way I interact with people that I either work with or work for, and then give a technology industry specific and recent example in my own life, having employed people and led a team in an innovation center. The first being a lot of my or sort of take on this, the origins of that come from having been, as a first chosen profession, an educator and a performing artist. And that is to say, as a music educator, whether you're interacting with young adults or children or, older adults that are beyond the young adult category, you're conducting yourself in ways that make you culturally relevant to a culturally based industry and discipline. So you want to establish a relationship of trust with the people that are part of an ensemble, right? Or a production crew, what have you. While at the same time maintaining some kind of conscious presence, an understanding between all parties that there's somebody here due to the sort of structure around us who has a certain level of decision making versus the other party, right? In plain English, as a teacher, teachers will often, and even parents will make the mistake of becoming a friend in our truest sense of what friend means to their child, or a teacher to their student. The danger in that being that eventually, because of the very nature of the very real relationship that's happening in reality, friends don't tell other friends what to do. When you're a teacher, there are moments where you're going to have to tell somebody else what to do. You're going to have to give them very clear direction. Not suggestions, not mentorship, and it could be a behavioral issue. It could be, this at the end of the day. Now, people listening, you could say, employer, employee, same thing, or founder and new employee, right? Same thing, right? Occasionally, we're just going to have a conversation where I say, look, I know you asked all the questions, like this is just what we're doing. This is the direction we're going in. And you can't have that if you have a friendship in the purest form. Now,
Yeah.
recently, I've had the privilege of starting and leading an innovation center, a place of helping a multiplicity of teams through a variety of means seek to go from concept to a real business. I had the privilege of hiring my own team to do that. And within that small team, we had, surprisingly enough, and this is the kind of thing you learn over time as you get to know people, I had a full spectrum of employees with varying interest in the spectrum literally went, though he was not vocal at all about it, it was clear over time that this person was making sure he doesn't have any real friendly ties of any kind with anybody in the community, anybody on our team, anybody on our extended team, right? All the way to folks who really, they want to get to know the people that they work with a little bit, right? Maybe for them, it's a much higher priority that their social life and their professional life interchange.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's a right or wrong for the individual. I always love personally as a leader to respect what people need or want. I do have to question a bit when I come across people because, and this is where I want to point out for our listeners, it's fundamental human behavior. Where's it coming from? That's part of what I want to get at in this conversation.
Yeah.
When people have a fear of a certain level of trust, you have to ask yourself, well, what's the origins of that? Where does that come from? Right? We have to respect that as we get to know people. But I think a lot of the ideas, besides the great point you made, Ryan, from our past, right? That's sort of closely tied with class and with power dynamics. There's also this issue of fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe I'm not confident in myself, right? And I just am afraid that the people got to know me
more. The Vermont Technology Alliance. The VTTA is the only statewide organization focused on Vermont's tech business sector and entrepreneurs. Our business members are Fortune 500 companies, startup founders, small business owners, and soloists. We provide advocacy, recruiting of tech talent, events, and other networking opportunities. We are the heart of the tech ecosystem in Vermont. Become a member now at vtta.org. The Vermont Technology Alliance. Tech thrives here.
Status quo. I mean, I think that's the thing too, is to your point, maybe not everybody needs or thrives on that extra connection and really only wants that home connection. And I've worked jobs in the past where I love the fact that I don't have to think about work from the moment I punch out to the moment I punch in. And when I punch in, I have a list of things to do. And even if I'm responsible for other people, I still have a list of this is what gets done. And I just do it. It doesn't really require a whole lot of thought, right? And doesn't require me to socialize per se. It requires me to communicate well and effectively with the people that I'm instructing. But I wasn't in a role or a job where there was anything sort of outside the box to worry about, right? And to that point, yeah, there's a place for that, for people that want that, and for our system and society and opportunities to work to offer that. But I also don't want those people to wake up thinking that that's their only option, or I don't want someone to see that and think that's their only option. And that's where, this sort of busting of the myth, I think, is important, because maybe for a person to recognize their own personality and see that, hey, I shouldn't mix business and personal relationships, and I should just find a way to put my blinders on and do my work and keep that separate from just enjoying life, by all means, more power to you. That's called the pursuit of happiness, and that's your right. Right. But don't let a misconception that it's a rule that we shouldn't mix business and personal relationships.
Ryan, I want to go back to a point you made just a moment ago, and if I may, I'd suggest, Will, if you would, take the lead on it, and that is, you mentioned, I want to pull this into startup culture, technology of all kinds, right? Um, Given the nature of startups, the pace at which they need to grow, right? The pace that they might grow when they're part of an accelerator and they're going through the different stages of funding, and just the nature of 9 times out of 10, really truly science-based work, collaborative work, right? And just the culture of the average person that has a deep passion for being in a startup world, right? How does that play with the development of relationships? What relationships, for one, are best optimum in that kind of environment?
I would say creative relationships, playful ones, curious ones, the kind where you can really dig deep into an idea with someone and or go big picture, someone that you feel comfortable doing that with, and also definitely someone that you feel you can be vulnerable with. You can feel wrong with that person, around that person, and that it doesn't feel like something threatening either. I think that's a very important part, especially in that early stage where there's so much that you're figuring out and there's so much that's going to change, that being around people that you feel comfortable with changing your mind around and hearing their thoughts and addressing it and being open to understanding something different and that you may be wrong and that you may need to change a direction or a heading. Pivots happen in startups all the time.
And it feels like, there's a lot of talk in startup culture about, access to funding and access to the right influential people. And I'm not saying these two things aren't very important. If you don't have those two things, it's very hard to get a true startup to scale. However, there's a whole lot of other things that have to happen beyond that. So
Absolutely.
you can have a lot of influential people mentoring you. You can have a lot of influential people driving your funding scheme. But if you don't have what you just articulated well, it's like, how do you have to have a high modicum of trust between the founding team members in order for a company to be able to do exactly as you say. You're experimenting with the financial model, you're experimenting with any number of the different points to the IP, you're proving that out. And unless you have that, I don't know, whatever minimum modicum of a relationship that we're talking about that's optimal to have, I don't see how you get through that, especially for the people who are in a leadership role where, like, because I feel like I'd constantly be looking behind my shoulder, like, is everyone totally committed to this? Or at any given time, is somebody just going to say, yeah, I know we haven't really ever talked about it, but I don't like the directions it's going in, and they're just not a part of this anymore at a key moment where you need them.
Yep, that's very true. Trust. The other one that came to mind as well, as you were saying, was grace, of allowing someone else to be wrong as well, and that can be okay and that you can move forward with that too. And then, as you were saying, in terms of direction and making sure that everyone stays on the same page and feels comfortable sharing where they're at, what they've been thinking in terms of a venture's overall direction. And an example comes to mind as well of a more challenging situation, maybe, that I personally experienced with very early stage startup. Went through an accelerator, and the founders, we were all friends from prior projects. And I was in the role of essentially an operations focus, where other folks were holding the vision, holding the technical side. Mine was more operations, where it was making sure that the next step that needs to happen happens. So there's a fair bit of pressure that comes from that kind of role, where you are following up with people and asking, hey, how is this part of the venture progressing? Are these next steps happening on this timeline that we had discussed together? And there's a dynamic tension in that, because you're the person who's checking in and making sure that things are moving forward, and sometimes giving a little bit of extra oomph to push them forward. And at the same time, these are friends. And how do you do that gracefully with each other? How do you check in on these things and also give someone space to say, oh, yeah, I actually didn't get to that. Yesterday got too busy for me. I do need to pick up the slack on it. And there was a point where the founder, who was holding the vision of this, said to me as well that they needed some space and a little bit more space, a little bit less pressure because they were going through some things in their own life and dealing with a lot in this startup as well. And that we had that trust and that communication for them to be able to say to me, hey, I appreciate what you're doing and even how you're doing it, but I just need a little bit less pressure on this side right now. And I think having relationships where you're comfortable saying that and you're comfortable hearing that as feedback is really important.
It's interesting. What comes to mind too is the opportunity that we have today to use technology in this way, right? Because what we have are a bunch of tools that, if used right, help us plan our schedule without things being in our face, without being ridden. We know the task is there when we're ready to attend to it. When communicating with clients or colleagues, being able to set the expectation that that ability to communicate when ready is there, or to access a calendar and make a plan is there, allows us to a little bit disassociate that sort of inhuman pressure to get things done, right? Mm-hmm. Allow us to keep the mindful communication between the people very humane and keep those relationships intact. And so, I would say if there is any movement on this, we're going the right direction too, in that we have this use of technology and this opportunity to continue growing with technology to allow it to help us not compartmentalize personal and business relationships, but maybe compartmentalize personal and business communications and interactions among the same people, right? So it helps us have those personal and business relationships with an individual or a group of individuals.
You have just alluded to a solution that we can offer the listeners. That being, I will say for myself, I've gotten over the years very good at finding platforms and using them, usually simultaneously 2 or 3 with teams. So that what happens is, first of all, if I have any founders listening right now, you will know in a moment's notice through the technology you're using what kind of intercommunications are going on between the team, your team members, and to yourself. See the status of the tasks related to any project-related work being done, right? Mm-hmm. This is assuming we're using calendar platforms, project management, et cetera. And so what happens when you do that is you consolidate, you get the mundane stuff out of the way, if you will, that you're describing, Ryan. And so anytime you're actually interacting with your staff or your team members is really spent on strategic conversation, on what comes next, right? As far as the projects themselves, on visionary type things, on really any number of other more worthwhile and stimulating things to talk about that propel the business, as opposed to we need to have 5 meetings this week about what each of you is doing, what it, like anything that's especially task driven, like why even do that? You know? Just get it out of the way. And the trust is implied when you know that people are filling out the stuff they need to fill out and so forth,
Yeah, I wish I could remember my source, but I was just reading some article that was talking about how mindfulness training is so much more beneficial to productivity than positivity or productivity training. It's just that taking the time to be mindful about your communications, about tools, thinking about how you're using them, how they're working, knowing that, you're going to review that again and then moving on to the next thing. And it suddenly frees you up to give all your attention to those creative endeavors and those communications directly with people.
What's interesting, guys, is our conversation has entirely morphed for some time now into the, I'll call it the internal, right, within teams. Let's talk about the external for a minute, if I may. And let's bring that to rural environments, right? Because that's really the context that we're trying to put everything in is, the startup world, technology, rural development in a rural place like Vermont. And I thought I knew this before moving here. Ryan, for the listeners, Ryan and Will have been here for a long time. And I've been doing business for some time in Vermont prior to this, but my family and I have only lived here for exactly a year as of last week. And I have to say, I thought I knew how small Vermont was. Then I got here, and holy tamale. I mean, like, this is a small place. So for anyone thinking, no, I've got to like really isolate all of my relationships, not just the idea of like, I have my professional relationships with my personal, but just like isolating one relationship to another, right? I, if that's your bag, it's going to be awfully hard in a place like this. But
Yeah.
speak to, and I'll let you guys choose who wants to go first and second. Like, speak to not only like why that's so, but like, why why that's going to hurt you. Well, what are the things you should be doing?
Will, you want to take that for a minute?
Oh, it's so true. I like to say to people that Vermont is a small town. It just is. And
Yeah.
there are so many overlaps within communities. And I think I alluded to earlier how I really appreciate intersectionality between communities, between industries. So there's a number of these different communities that I know around Vermont, and you'll end up meeting someone in a business networking space who knows your roommate or knows the person that you met at a contra dance last week. And that element, it just adds more context. It adds more richness for me, anyways, of understanding how all these people are connected. The person that a business that I'm consulting with that built a house for someone that I then meet the next day at City Market. And when you tie all these pieces together, I feel like it makes, at least for me, business more human. It's less faceless when you have these kinds of connections in this space. And in a way, that level of connection to me reverses that myth of business being this transactional space, of purely transactional. That when you're in and among a small community where people know each other, and when you bring up the name of one person in one circle, there's a good chance that somebody in a group of 8 or 9 people is going to know that person or know the company that they work with or know a relative of theirs. And to me, that adds a human richness because then there's faces, there's names. And that's, yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Ryan.
Well, I have to say, I agree wholeheartedly in what you're describing in that rural community. And I think it's not just rural in some ways. I think it's also maybe the environment, the mountainous, the more northern, the extent of our seasons that has an impact on the way our communities gel, if you will. But I also think that what it is that rural environment, it's not that exists in the rural environment and it doesn't in an urban environment. I think that it is illustrated in the rural environment and it teaches us as a community the reality of it, whereas it's a little easier to live in the illusion of isolation when you're surrounded by a million people within 20 square miles, or the way the concentration of people is in a city. It can almost be easier to feel lonely or be isolated or put the blinders on with so much going on around you and feel disconnected. And I think that's demonstrated in society today. And I think that it's definitely um, intriguing to see how communities come together in rural places, in both good and bad scenarios. And I think it teaches my kids and it teaches us the importance of those human connections. And again, I'll bring it back to maybe technology providing the opportunities and the way people are becoming so connected regardless of their geography, that we can spread this sort of knowledge and understanding that we learn from observing our rural connections, to more treat the human connection that way, and start to treat each other more like humans, even in more urban places. It's interesting to observe even in scenarios like look at hurricane, flooding event scenarios. and to compare the latitudes where people in more northern areas, you tend to hear a little bit more of the warm-hearted stories of people checking on their neighbors and taking care of each other. Whereas in the deeper south latitudes, you hear stories of looting and, violence. And that's not, you know, it's not a fault of people per se. It's really a matter of, the institutions and the social structures that exist amongst us. And hopefully we can, by interconnecting more globally and bringing these innovation concepts into more rural communities, we're diversifying the participation, right? We're bringing more people, more mind share into it, and are moving the right direction with that.
Here's something I've experienced as a new Vermonter, which I would posit as contributing to higher quality relationships. In a couple of instances, I've had folks, as I'm getting to know them and they, there becomes a point, perhaps a little early in the conversation, for an opportunity to make another mutual connection or what have you. And people have said in a few occasions, I'm not loath to do that for you, but I almost feel like I kind of want to get to know you a little bit more because I really value my relationship with that other person. And I just want to make sure that we're good before I make that connection,
Yeah.
And for somebody listening right now and hearing this, you might say, wow, that's pretty standoffish or whatever. But I don't think so. I think that comment in and of itself is an example. It alludes to the fact that so much of society is short-term thinking, which leads to more transactional behavior. So, we got to think in terms of quality, not quantity, and quality almost always takes time to cultivate, because exactly that, right? Whatever the phenomenon is, you're cultivating something, you're stewarding something, as opposed to hurrying up and just making it happen, regardless of the quality of the experience. So I think it's like, to me, that's sort of an indicator of it's a small world.
Mm-hmm.
People are here for a reason. A lot of us, and Vermont is like one of these places where a lot of people didn't grow up here for 5 generations. They came here, and they came here by choice, entirely by choice, and want to be here. And that, coupled with the people who have been here for generations, and they also choose to be here. They're not stuck in this place. They have a deep sense for what this place is, has been, can be, right? And so they just want to make sure that those relationships and the bonds that tie people together within a certain community or region are maintained. And that speaks to a culture here that's been created over hundreds of years, most of which was before we were even a state.
Yeah, I believe there is a strong level of intentionality to that. I think you're right.
Any final thoughts from each of you? What other solutions can we offer people, or considerations that they really should be thinking about as they build their own rural communities in this way?
Well, I would almost maybe just allude to our next topic, even, which is, once you get over any resistance, or at least the resistance to finding opportunities to mix business and friendships, it's about getting invested in your community. A lot of people are divested from their local community. A lot of people, don't have that opportunity or haven't figured out how to look for it. And I think that's, what people can be doing is looking for ways to connect with their local business community. Obviously here, buy local and shop local, but learn what that local community network looks like, and see if there is a startup or a hub or some way to get involved and meet some people, or maybe get invested or participate. People are told often to save your money for a rainy day, which should have a little saved up. But the real value that anyone can create is by investing in and stewarding assets. And so, I think that's where we can start to overcome those disconnections, right? Build relationships, build connections, learn the business community. And, investment could be financial. It could be sharing advice and experience with someone that can help them succeed. Or it could just be, being a customer to, a new business.
I think I have something that's fairly concise and actionable. And this is a strategy. No, not even a strategy. I'll just call it a rule of threes that I've found to be true, at least in my own experiences socially with people, which is 3 contexts. Something I've discovered for myself is that if I meet someone only in one context, that very often there's sort of only so far that that relationship can grow, or that it only grows at a slower rate. But if I can meet someone in 3 different contexts, the richness and the connection of that relationship grows exponentially from where it started. So if you can meet someone in a business setting on a specific project that you're working together with, meet them for coffee a week later, and then you happen to see them at a music festival the next month and get into a deep conversation about something completely unrelated to whatever you may have spoken about before even. That approach I found initially by complete accident, and then later doing this intentionally in my life of trying to meet people in 3 contexts and finding that to make a huge difference in how engaged and how relatable I find these connections in my community.
See, I knew there was a reason why the 3 of us needed to do this special feature. Well, listeners, I hope you have... I'm sorry, say it again.
Oh, and I said we've gotten to meet in those 3 contexts.
And we have all met in those 3 contexts. Yeah, right on. Listeners, I hope you find this helpful. I hope that your startup experiences out there in the real world are going great. And we look forward to bringing you our next topic in our next episode. Until then, I'm Scott Graves.
Will Jeffries.
And Ryan Munn has left the building a little early. And we hope you've enjoyed.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.